Good day, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Not Just Business. This happens to be my first live interview since COVID started. It's for more than a year, and I'm very pleased to have today as my guest the very famous one and only Andre du Toit, usually known as the Big Positive Guy. Morning, Andre.
How's it, Jerry? Wonderful to be here.
Thank you. So from the actuarial profession to motivational speaker, that sounds like quite a leap. I mean, tell us about that.
Yeah, I spent 25 years in the corporate world. Ended up as the MD of the e-commerce globally for Hanover Reinsurance Group, which was a huge move away from everything that I'd done before. And I think I was about 44 or 45. And I had this tremendous yearning to come back to this country. Mm-hmm. And it happened a little bit by accident because I came back, I actually went into property and I bought and invested a lot into property. And then one day somebody asked me to speak, and the reasoning for wanting me to speak was, why would a white male Afrikaans South African who had the big job overseas come back?
Yeah.
Which is a very good question. And I started sharing it, but I knew I couldn't share it from an emotional point of view. I started sharing from a business point of view. And so I started speaking about economics, what was happening in the world, and there was a huge trigger into it. And yeah, all of a sudden I was getting bookings from all over the place, so that happened almost by accident. But pretty much from 2009, I've done nothing else except speak in public, and I'm still here.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, everybody knows you by your more popular name, the Big Positive Guy. How did that develop?
I was fascinated because my name's Andre du Toit, which I don't know if you know, but is the sixth most common Afrikaans name in the country.
Is that right?
So it's really a common name. There's hundreds of Andre du Toits in this country.
And a few others.
It's like Quest for the Merva. There's hundreds of us. And for some reason or other, nobody could seem to remember it. So I kept getting bookings for everyone asking for the big guy or the big positive guy. And the first time I actually went on a stage and somebody introduced me as the big positive guy, there was such a reaction to it that I physically changed the name of my company, and it's been one of the best things that I've done. So I have the strange scenario now is that I can phone very good friends and say, hi, it's Andre here. And they go, who? And I go, Big Positive Guy. And they go, Big Positive Guy. So I've actually become invisible, and Big Positive Guy has become my personality.
Yeah. Well, you certainly are a big guy. So.
Yeah. I'm on a fast, so who knows what will happen in the next 28 days.
To lose weight. We'll get to that. You don't strike me as somebody, sort of a purveyor of motivational slogans, kind of thing is you can be anything you want to be, or you become what you think about. It's one of my favorites I read in the book. That's nonsense, If that were true, every teenage boy would be a girl. So what does being positive mean for you?
Yeah, for me it was quite interesting because when people started saying to me, "Praat 'n bietjie moed in die mense," encourage the people a little bit. I grew up in the 80s where I think we were used to, and I won't mention names, but some of the motivational speakers were making you stand on the chairs and yell, "Yes, I can." That is so opposite to my personality. Yeah. So I've always tried to rationalize and intellectualize it and say, what does it physically mean to be positive? And maybe a little bit later on we can talk about when you're faced with really, really hard times, it's easy to say, be positive. But for me, it was really to look at the facts and to look at both sides of the story. And that's something that I've loved doing my entire life, is to look at both sides of the story and then to find the truth somewhere in there. And I think, unfortunately, what we've done, and having been in the media now for the last 3 years, is so much of the information we're being fed is incorrect. So how can we make correct decisions? And so my job, I just see, is laying out the facts on both sides and saying, if we're speaking about South Africa, is what is the scenario really behind the scenes? And then also making a comparison with somebody that's of an equal size to us. In South Africa, we love to compare ourselves to the United States or England, which is slightly unfair. But the reality is we don't mind those comparisons. So if we're going to do the comparisons, let's do them and see what we can drag out of that. And I think most of the times when you hear the actual facts, you will be pleasantly surprised. South Africans are renowned for being the most confident about their knowledge about what's going on and also being the most incorrect. which is a fascinating study done by Dr. Hans Rosling in his book. And he said South Africans are completely so adamant that they know all the facts, and yet we're not in control of everything that we know.
So you obviously know people well. You study people. You're just that kind of guy. You're naturally attracted. I know you've got thousands of friends. What amazes you about people?
One of the things that somebody said to me the other day is that I introduced nearly 50 or 60 people. And I went around the table, and every person I introduced, I gave them an attribute. So I would say, there's Derek Peed, exceptionally clever, has amazing hobbies, well known in the Rotarian world. And every person I did is I somehow recognize their good qualities. And I think that's something that I still do, is I look at most people, and I have yet to find a person who doesn't have some amazing qualities. And so I see the world in a slightly rosier vision. And so whenever I meet anybody, no matter their standing in life, for me, there are positive aspects. And I think people feel that. They feel that I can recognize as good things. And sometimes they don't even recognize the things that I'm saying. And they go, my word, but I am really kind, or I am really gentle, or I am very supportive. And people need to hear that good news. So the only thing that does surprise me is when I meet people that are genuinely evil or genuinely unkind. And that really pees me off. So, but I'm a big guy, I can handle that.
So I was going to ask you, so what disappoints you about people?
I think unkindness for me is probably right at the top of the list. I'm a little bit fearful of the future. I see people are sort of turning away from the truth and from fact. I see so much stuff happening around the world that concerns me, where people literally are starting to separate and draw away from each other, which is something that I thought would not happen. I actually thought the future would be us drawing closer together. But there are a lot of people that don't have. There's a lot of people that are struggling. I think globalization has been quite difficult for a lot of people. And so we're hearing all kinds of talk about revolt and all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And while I can understand that, I am quite disappointed in that as well.
One thing that I didn't know about you is that you're a keen genealogist, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Absolutely.
And I believe you've actually written several books on the subject.
Yeah, it was a strange thing because my father died when I was 28. And so I've got my mother here and my sister here, and my brother lives in Australia. And I got married, and my wife is pretty much an orphan now. All her relatives, her close relatives, have died. And so we sat there and we looked at this tiny little nuclear family of about 3 or 4 people. And I couldn't believe that I'd ended up in such a tiny family, especially being a Detoy, and started researching it. And then obviously my nerdy side came out because I just loved the sort of detective work. And that happened, it's now almost 30 years ago. But in those first 20 years, for me, it was the greatest delight to sit there and track down my great-grandfather and the next one and then the next one. Interestingly enough, I have a database now of about 12,000 people on my genealogy program, of which I'm related to about 4,000 of them.
Really?
I've tracked back every single line of my immediate descendants up to the time that they came into South Africa. And then I started getting fascinated about how they lived. And so I started writing down some of the stories. Some of them are quite intellectual, just factual, but some of them are a little bit of historical drama and license, where I've tried to imagine, taken the facts and tried to put some things in there. So I've got one that I called Life in the Past Lane, which is my first one, which is my immediate ancestors. I managed to discover at one stage, Google brought out Google Translate, and suddenly I had access to archives in Europe. And so I could start tracking back. So I've actually tracked my family back in one line to the 3rd century.
Good Lord.
And found out that I'm the descendant of many strange people, including people like Louis the 8th and the 9th. I am the descendant of a Muslim princess. I am a descendant of Charlemagne. I'm a descendant of some popes, which is weird. And I'm talking like 40, 45, 55 generations ago.
Good.
But I'm also the descendant of many laborers and workers and basket weavers. And so I wrote another book, and it was called From Shepherds to Emperors. And what I do is I share stories from some of the lowliest people and some of the highest people, and just realizing that I am a conglomeration or a makeup of so many different people. And so inside me, there's a king and there's also a peasant. And for me, that's fascinating to know. And I love that process of the research and the writing and just finding out things.
I suppose that's probably true of most people. We all have everything in us.
Well, I think if you're Afrikaans speaking in this country, I'm related to you somewhere, because there weren't a lot of people here. And so very often I do it as a joke. I say, find me your great-grandfather's name and I'll show you how I'm related to you. And that's quite interesting. And that also humbles you a little bit, because you suddenly realize that no matter who's out there in the world, good or bad, is that somewhere along the line we shared a common ancestry.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What are your other hobbies and interests? What did people not know about you?
Oh, no, that's a difficult question. Everyone knows I love to read. For 3 years on the radio, I did a weekly radio slot where I sort of spoke about the book of the week. This year, I found it absolutely fascinating. I have struggled to read 2 or 3 books. I mean, it's nearly April. It is April. I've struggled to read. I'm actually taking a bit of sabbatical. I love movies, but unfortunately, again, movies also in 2020 just came to a grinding halt. There's very little stuff there. If I just say what my real hobby is, it would probably be people. I spend an enormous amount of time with people. I'm energized by them. When you said I have a lot of friends, I did something the other day. I made a post on my social media and there were 2,500 people who responded. And somebody made the comment, it's all just pie in the sky. Until I started at the top of the list and I told them something about every single person on that list of all 2,500. And for me, they're in my head. I know these people. My social media has now grown to 50,000, so I don't know all of them. But I would say on my immediate page, the 5,000 people there, I pretty much know who they are.
Good Lord.
And I've had coffee with probably 3,000 of them. So for me, that's interesting.
So that's one thing we have in common. I was being a coach and a mentor myself. When we go anywhere, I like to sit and watch people.
Love it.
When we go to overseas, my wife would like to go to museums and art galleries and stuff. I would like to sit at the sidewalk cafe and just look at people, actually make up stories about them. And just from the way they look, the way they walk and talk, make up their life story.
I'd like to take the people and take them into the museum with me and do both.
Yeah. So you're an inspiration, obviously, to many people. You mentioned thousands of them, but most of the listeners to this podcast would not have heard of you before now. And these are tough times for entrepreneurs and business people in general. What advice can you give them on how to stay positive?
I think one of the best lines that I read, and I can't remember who it was, but you mentioned Deepak Chopra before, so I'm wondering if it wasn't him, but maybe you just led me astray there. The sentence that I heard was, everything needs context. And the problem is with us is we don't live long enough. So if we lived to be 200 years old, we'd all be batting and just saying, 1918 Spanish flu. It was really bad. A lot of people died. But we came out of it. And not only did we come out of it, but the 20s were some of the best years in the world's history. If you're thinking about the Great Gatsby, some of the greatest growth we had economically came from the period just after the Spanish flu, right up until the 29 crash. And if we had a longer perspective, if we lived to be 1,000 years old, we would be going ho-hum. The reality is there's been 10 or 15 of these major things, the bubonic plague, and say, this is nothing. You remember the Black Plague, or remember the bubonic plague, or all of these things. We need perspective sometimes. So things that happen in the short term, and I know it's very real when you've lost your job or you've lost your business and stuff, but the reality is it'll be back. What we need to do is we need to find mechanisms with which to survive. And I always want to say to them, alles sal regkom. There was a famous saying in my farmer's background family, alles sal regkom, everything will come right. It just takes a little bit of time. So I just want to encourage you, no matter where you are, all of us have been through bad times, but the reality is in 6 months, 12 months, whoever knows how long it's going to take, everything will come back. And I've got a feeling, and many of the economists and the talks that I've been going to are speaking about 2022 and maybe even 2023 being the year of babies, braais, and babbelas. Because I think when we're eventually let free and we're allowed to do what we want to, I think we're going to party and celebrate, and I think we're going to see such a resurgence economically. It's easy to have a resurgence when you've gone into a huge negative, but I think we're going to go way past where we were before. So I think it's going to be interesting. The trick is to stay positive now, and I know it's difficult if there's no cash in the bank, but we've got to remain positive, and there's a number of techniques that we can use to do that.
Who was it that said, in the end, everything will be all right? And if it's not all right, it's not yet the end.
I like that as well. It's not the end yet.
So you yourself recently had a very nasty, life-threatening health scare. Tell us about that.
I went to the doctor and happened to mention to him I had this little spot on my back. And he looked at it and didn't like the look of it. And he took it out the next day. And 3 days later, I got a phone call to say, please come see him. And what he said to me is that I had a very dangerous, aggressive melanoma, a type 4 melanoma. And pretty much when I went home and I looked at it in Google, which I normally do, The first sentence, which is a huge mistake when you've got something like this, look at Google. The first sentence was, "This is a death sentence." And I was like, wow, that doesn't look good. And then obviously being slightly mathematically inclined, I looked at the statistics and it said I had a 15% chance of survival over 5 years. And I was like, for somebody who spent my whole life doing well academically, 15% is not even a pass.
Yeah,
it's a good G, somewhere along there.
It certainly wouldn't issue.
Yeah, so for me, it was an absolutely shocking experience. And you were mentioning about being positive. I'll never forget going to the doctor and saying, "What do I need to do?" And he said, "Andre, you need to see some oncologists. I'm going to refer you to some specialists. But all I can say to you is stay positive." And I went home and I thought, what is stay positive? I am the big positive. I make a living out of being positive. So what does being positive mean? Do I walk around with a grin on my face despite the fact that I've got a death sentence on me because they were talking 3 weeks to 12 months? Do I walk around and tell jokes? Do I walk around encouraging other people with a smile on my face? Do I treat it like it's not happening? And interestingly, a very ordinary friend of mine gave me the answer. He phoned me. This was about just 20th or so of February. And he said to me, "Andre, I need you to book the 26th of February. I'm getting married." And I was like, wow, that is so soon. It's like 6 days from now. He said, "No, not this year, next year." And I thought, wow. And I said, that's fantastic. And suddenly I realized what being positive is. Being positive is realizing that there's something better in the future, or potentially something better in the future. And the second I did that, I started making goals. I booked a trip to Mauritius in March next year. So I started booking and making goals and plans for things I still wanted to do in my life. And the second I had that, I realized what people said about being positive. So the process was not pretty, and it has been exceptionally difficult. But throughout all of this, I have had some tremendous support systems, both in terms of the people that follow me, but in terms of my own family and my own mental attitude. So for me, being positive, if I can answer your question now that you asked me right up front, is believing in a better future. Believing that there's always something out there that I still haven't done or still need to do, and that will make the world a slightly better place.
So, okay. And then you started a blog, I noticed, on sort of a blog on Facebook that I found quite fascinating. What made you decide to do that, and how did that help you?
I've been in the public eye for a long time now, probably for the last 12 or 13 years. And everything that I do is documented somewhere. Or you can either see it or hear it. And I actually found an attorney friend of mine, and I said, this is going to sneak out. Everyone's going to hear. And I don't want people to tell stories, because, stories get exaggerated. And I said to him, what do you think about making this public? And he said, I think it's an excellent idea. And I was quite hesitant about it because, it's a very private thing. And subsequently, I have discovered almost 30 people that are going through serious cancers since making it public. Most of them have been very quiet about it. Many you and I know in common. That have been very quiet about it, that are really, really struggling with vicious diseases. But what I decided to do is to make it public and to document it and to see if I could find the positive in it. And I made one post on Facebook, just one. And I said, this is the most difficult post I've had to make for a long time. I've got a very serious cancer, but I know many of you don't want to hear all this negativity, so I'm going to start a separate group. And if you're interested and you'd like to follow my journey, please join this group. Well, instantaneously, over 1,000 people moved within an hour, and that group has grown up to about 3,000 now that have been following my journey. I thought if I was going to write the journey of what was happening to me, the last thing I wanted to do was make it morbid. So I've tried to do it in a slightly humorous, sort of tongue-in-cheek style. And it seems to have just resonated. So interestingly enough and I was chatting to you earlier on, is that in that first 48 hours to 72 hours, I received over 2,500 messages via Facebook, WhatsApp, or on telephone calls. It was crazy. My phone was blocked up within literally 10 minutes. And for me, the greatest thing, and I almost want to say is one of my greatest realizations, is that incredible groundswell of support is one of the reasons why I'm still here. It's very difficult for the universe to argue when literally thousands of people are sending goodwill and good feelings towards me. And so for me, that's been an incredible thing. Was I scared? In the beginning, I was terrified. Those first week or two, in the daytime, it was fine, but I used to, maybe I'm a little bit old, I call them night terrors. Some people call them panic attacks. I used to wake up at night at 3 o'clock in the morning with a panic attack. 200 beats a minute on your heart and sweat pouring down your forehead, and the thought of imminent death feels like you're dying. And one of the things I often used to do is just go sit and read those 2,500 messages. And that used to be so therapeutic and take me through to another stage. So, yeah, going public, has it been a good move? Absolutely. It has been an incredibly good move for me. I have managed to create an opportunity for dialogue with a number of individuals that need help at this moment in time. And I have been negotiating and speaking and seeing where I can assist with some people. And I'm seeing a lady this afternoon at 1:00 who said, please come have coffee with me. I just wanted to say thank you because you've helped me come to terms with my mother's death in some of the writings that you've done. So for me, that's huge. Yeah. So even if I helped one person, it would be good, but I think a lot of people have been very appreciative of the writings that I've done.
What did you learn about yourself during this ordeal?
I'm not ready to die. I've always said that I'm very ready to die. I really have had a wonderful, intriguing life. But as I said to you, being positive means that I have a 15-year business plan in front of me, and I'm sitting and I just started it. So how can you take me away from this now when I haven't even started messing with it? I also realized that my family, while very independent and very, very competent to look after themselves, I don't think we're quite ready. I've got an 18-year-old daughter. I think there's still a lot of things I need to do there. And then the last thing which I realized, I am actually quite strong. I'm an emotional person, as you know, but I'm very strong inside. Things I was terrified of. As I said, I've never been to a hospital. I've never actually been sick in my whole life. I've never been to a hospital, never had an anesthetic. Now I've had operations and intubation and all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And I'm still here. I remember coming out in the anesthetic and my first words were, I'm alive. It was a positive expression. I thought, well, I've still got a chance. So I'm strong. I'm strong, but I've still got stuff to do. I'll still be around for a while.
I was fascinated about your post about, as you said, you've got this group, you've got this thousands of people, and some of them are actually going through similar circumstances, but most of them aren't. But if you get into the other circle, call it the cancer ward, and the bell that gets rung, and the camaraderie that there seems to be there. Tell us a bit about that, but for me it was fascinating.
Well, first of all, I had some fairly hectic surgery. I always say they took out a 600-gram steak out of my back. I've had most of my lymph nodes removed, and I was now waiting for the diagnosis. And the doctors were quietly optimistic towards me, but the reality is when I saw the histology, and the histology said that basically I was clear, they were so excited that it was obviously something that wasn't ordinary. They either delighted, but I'm sure they see lots of ordinary histology, but after the operation, they were like, Andre, everything's gone. There is nothing that we can see here. And for me that day, there were numbers of miracles that happened. And one of them was just the people that I sat with in the cancer ward. It was weird because I sat with 3 people who all had exactly the same cancer as I had, but lesser types. So where mine was a type 4, and that's measured on depth. Some of them had stage 1s, then one had a stage 2, and another one had a stage 3. The guy with the stage 3 had come into the hospital same time as me. I was being seen for the last time. His wound had gone septic and was exceptionally ill, and while I was still sitting there, they dragged him off back to surgery again. The other 2 were sitting there, and the lady was saying she's had chemo. She's had a whole portion of her throat removed. She's now on radiation therapy, and she was saying the pain was extraordinary. The other guy that was sitting next to me had been there for 6 years, been struggling to stay alive, and his arms were terribly puffy, and his leg was terribly puffy from all the lymph nodes that had been taken out, and he was obviously in agony. And he said to me, what type of cancer have you got? And when I told him, he was like, but you look well. And I said, I am well. And so for them, it was a little bit of shock. So when I went into the meeting, and I must say, I went to the UCT academic, and they were absolutely, absolutely outstanding. They had a panel of doctors, and every time they came and told you something important, you would have a panel of experts. So I was sitting there with a number of professors and plastic surgeons and oncologists, and they were saying to me, Andre, you dodged a bullet. Something's happened, yeah? But whatever it is, take it and run with it. Try not to get it in the next year, because that's going to be the big risk factor. And then as I left, the chief oncologist said to me, remember to ring the bell. And they've got a bell, it's called a healing bell. And when you have your last chemo or last radiation or you've been cured, you go ring the bell. So I walked out, and there must have been 60 people in the ward, in the waiting room. And these are people waiting for chemo, for radiation. They're at various levels. Just before that, a guy had come out there, and I actually was about to say to my wife, look at this guy. He looks like a homeless person. He sort of staggered out there, crunched onto one of the chairs, and then almost immediately grappled in his little bag and took out his little bag and started vomiting his heart out of the bag. Obviously, a result of the chemo. But, so quickly we judge. And a lot of these people, we were sitting there, we all got things missing and parts missing, and we were all sort of under the threat of imminent death. And I went there and I posed with the healing bell so Glennis could get some nice pictures for Facebook, not thinking anything about it. And then I rang the bell, and I'm so sorry we never had the video on, because the entire ward waiting room leapt up, and if they could, and started applauding and clapping and shouting and screaming. For me, that was hope. There was hope for every single person there. Just a little emotional.
I can imagine. That in itself must be a huge emotion.
We composed ourselves, we walked out, then we burst into tears, and then I phoned the Uber. And I thought, I must get the Uber, because we didn't want to drive. And guess who was driving the Uber? But a guy called Hope. It was just the funniest thing. It was like that whole day was just miracles, one after the other. And even when I sat outside and I waited for the Uber, a little bird came and sat next to me, about a foot next to me, a pale-winged starling, a little baby, and sang like I was his parent. He sang and sang and sang, and I thought, this is not normal. So I'm not a person that normally, being a mathematician, we're not into signs and symbols.
Pale-winged starling in Pinelands.
Oh, my goodness, I tell you
they're
what.
quite rare in this part of the country.
In this part of the country, yeah, we've got a few of them. And these were all outside UCD Academic, and I was just blown away by all the things that happened to me that day. The joy of the doctors, the encouragement of their fellow patients, and also I call it parole. One day you're on death sentence, and the next day you're on parole, behave yourself for a year, and then your sentence is relieved. And that's literally how it felt to me. I was so encouraged. So one of the most amazing days of my life, I wrote that down. I hope I expressed it well enough, but also had massive, massive explosion of feedback from that particular day.
I can imagine. So what advice would you give to somebody going through a similar crisis?
Don't look at Google.
Don't get your...
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that I would advise. And if I can maybe just go through some of them. The first one for me is don't be scared to share it with other people. I think people can't help you if you haven't told them. So even if you don't want to do it like me and make it public, find your trusted circle of friends and share it with them so that they can do this journey with you. When we get to those end of days, we need help and support. Not only that, you'll find is that in so many different ways, people will be able to help, encourage, and support you. And sometimes I've seen people dying that I haven't been told that they're even sick. And there's a real regret from my side that I wasn't given that opportunity to meet with them or grieve with them or even just to pray for them. And for me, that's quite an important thing. The second thing is, whatever you believe about religion, and I like to think I'm spiritual, not religious, an enormous number of people prayed for me. I mean, if I had 2,500 or 3,000 people supporting me directly, I probably had 2 or 3 times that number praying for me. I even found my gardener the other day. He'd got his whole church of 200 people to have a special 30-minute prayer meeting for me. Now, whether that was to save his job or whether he genuinely cared, I also think that to have thousands of people sending out good, positive thoughts towards you must have some effect. And I can hear all the Christians saying that was God doing his thing. But I think regardless of your religion, I think what happens to have that amount of goodwill aimed at you is enormous. The last one is that it's easy to say I'm an island and I'm tough and I don't need anybody. But when we get older, and to be surrounded by close family is enormously powerful for me. And in my house, I've got my mother lives with us and my daughter and my wife, incredibly supportive of me. Very, very strong supporters, and that helped a lot. And then lastly is to find some mechanism whereby you can remain positive. I know it's difficult and easy to say, but you've got to find things. Find the expressions of joy within anything. When I went to the hospital, these doctors worked themselves to death, 12 hours at a time, seeing a lot of ugly things. And one of the things that amazed me is how just a kind word would light them up. And so I made the decision if I was going to be in a hospital, I was going to be a positive force. So I kept congratulating the doctors, telling them they were amazing. No matter if it hurt, I'd say that it didn't hurt. I thought they were the best doctors I've ever seen. I made them laugh. And because of that, I think I almost got treated differently. Well, I felt like I was getting royal treatment. And people loved it. People just loved that inspiration and kindness and humor. even in dark times.
Being positive, I mean, there's the opposite. The people that are always negative, they're always moaning, and, bad things seem to happen to them. And it's, my brother has a crude expression. He calls them shit magnets.
I love it.
But conversely, I've noticed being positive, doing things which you can't explain. And I've noticed it from my days as a card player. I used to be quite a serious bridge player, but I wouldn't say a serious gambler, but I used to play blackjack quite a bit, and I had the ability to count a little bit. But I noticed, and I've tested this with other card players, that the mood you're in when you're going to a casino or when you're going to a poker game or into a bridge game, the mood you're in will determine the cards you get. If you're feeling down and depressed, don't even go and try it because you're going to get crap cards. And they concur. Everybody I've asked experience the same thing. That's exactly true. Who can explain it? But that's just the way it is.
I think there's actual facts coming out about that. One of the things, Amy Cuddy, who gave an incredible talk about body language on one of her TED things, and in fact, I think it's in the top 10. So it's been watched literally over 20 million times. She spoke of a study where they did it, and all they did is about body language, about setting positive body language as opposed to negative body language. Now, the people who were coming to do the test didn't know what the test was about, but what they did is they did swabs out of their mouth, and they measured their testosterone and their stress levels at the same time. And then they made them sit in very big, positive sort of seating positions, so like arms spread out, legs apart, sort of power positions, as opposed to sort of very timid positions, bent over and just sort of holding your neck and being timid. Literally, they found that there was like a 20% change in your enzyme levels. In other words, if you were positive, you literally, physically had higher testosterone levels. If you were sitting timidly, you literally find your stress levels increasing by 10 to 20%. In 2 minutes. How real is that? And one of the tests they did afterwards is they tried to see how people felt about chances. And so what they did is they offered them to play a game of chance where there was a reward but also a penalty. And the game was just, we're going to take a pack of cards and we're going to draw 2 cards and you're going to see if you've got the higher card than I have. The people who were positive, 80% of them wanted to play. When people who were negative, only 20% of them played. They believed they were going to lose. So for me, I find that absolutely fantastic. I've got a keynote that I'm speaking about at the moment. It's called Economics of Positivity. And I think Adrian Gore was the first one who coined that phrase. And one of the things that he says is that positive leadership attracts money, people, good things towards you. So if you're a harbinger of doom and you're one of those negative people and stuff, and you're sitting at the bar and telling them how the world is going to come to an end, and it's going to be the interesting thing is people will gather around you and listen to your story. But people buy from people that are optimistic and tell that there is a future and that things are going to be better.
That's fantastic.
So I've actually started walking around to many big companies. I'm talking about serious financial companies. I'm saying the attitudes that we portray as leadership will determine the financial income into the future. So if you're a leader who believes that South Africa has had it and it's not going there, I promise you his company will go exactly that way. And when you speak to the really, I'm talking the multi-billionaires who run some of the top corporates and see what their views are, they're almost, without a doubt, exceedingly optimistic.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So finally, Andre, if you could do it all over again from the time you left school, what, if anything, would you do differently?
I think I've always said that I wouldn't do anything differently because I think we're the accumulation of everything that we've done. But I actually was chatting to somebody the other day and I was trying to give her some career advice. And she is the MD of a big company, but she feels she's not growing. And I think there was one stage in my life, probably from about 32 to 38, where I was running the place and where I was working at that stage. And I was the boss and it was very interesting. But I never grew. I just stayed in charge and I would never do that again. For me, it was almost like 6 lost years. I should have packed my bags and moved immediately because I think once you've done something, and I even believe this with MDs nowadays, I think MDs should have a lifespan of 5 years max. If you can't impart your knowledge and your style and things within 5 years, then really you're not doing anything. And then just stay on for 6 or 7 years, the world moves on. We don't need you there for decades. And that's one of the things that I've learned as well now. Is that so I've regretted those few years that I've been stagnated. But now I'm just looking at myself and saying, I can't believe it. There's still so much that I can do and so much that I want to do. So watch the space for the next 15 years. It should be quite interesting. If I can manage to outdo the big guy upstairs.
Actual statistics. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thanks very much, Andre. How can people get in hold of you or in touch with you?
I'm actually very easy to get hold of. If you go to social media, you can just type in Big Positive Guy. I am the last one left. If you go to Google as well and type in Big Positive Guy, there's only one left in the world, and that's me.
That's so.
So I'm quite easy to find.
Everybody else is negatives.
Everyone else is negative.
Negative, short-ass people.
So Andre de Toy or Big Positive Guy, just type it into Google. Somewhere along there, you'll find me. I'm the big dude with the blonde hair.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks very much, and all the best, man, for the future.
Thanks, Derek. Appreciate it.
And in impacting many other lives so positively.
Thanks, my friend. I appreciate it.